author and consultant in the area of personal development and spiritual leadership. She's the creator of the Spirit Group's small group ministry program, providing leadership training for ministry-driven individuals and organizations through the use of her 5 spiritual disciplines for personal and organizational growth, and her STEP STEP model for membership engagement. Mendhi has spoken to audiences around the world about the power of positive thinking and the benefits of small group support systems. She is the founder of the What If Up Club, providing inspiration and support for possibility people around the world. Mendhi is also a pioneer for personal and spiritual growth and development. In 2004, she launched Unity Online Radio, formerly Unity FM, where she hosted their first weekly broadcast, The Leading Edge. As the network producer, she grew the network to more than 20 programs, 100,000 listeners, which is now reaching people in more than 60 countries. So we're very lucky Audlin as our mentor and leader in these series of podcasts.
Thank you, Stephen. So, hello, Mendhi. You want to just pop on and say hi to us quickly?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Barbara. It's always a delight to be here, and thank you to AG&T for hosting this series, and thanks to all of you who are joining. I see people joining us even as we speak. So it's a wonderful opportunity to connect, and I know you're going to get us centered in prayer, but I'm looking forward to what we're talking about tonight, this evening, in terms of building spiritual community and some infrastructure for how to do that consciously and purposefully. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Great. So one of the first things that I like to do is, I hope that she doesn't mind, but I'm going to ask one of our attendees to open the program with a blessing, invocation, some centering exercise to get us all here together in the space. And I'm going to ask Diana Kennedy if she will be so kind as to allow me to put her on the screen so that she can deliver the invocation. And I'm going to promote her to a panelist, and she should be on screen in just a moment. There we go. Just a second, still coming on. Sometimes it's just a question of how quickly these internet connections work. Diana, can you hear us? Can you unmute yourself? Sorry, the system is lagging behind and not letting me unmute Diana. Diana, if you can hear me, you might be able to unmute yourself quicker than I can unmute you. Can you see where that is?
I just saw a little message pop up that said unmute.
Yeah, it sounds as if your internet connection is just a little bit, a little too weak.
So sorry.
Oh no, well, we can hear you a little. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'm honored to. Let us just take a moment and give thanks for this opportunity to connect, to commune with one another. We are so grateful for all that you are doing to bring people together, to teach us about building community, and go into our heart space with gratitude, overflowing, and keep our hearts and minds open. What is ours to share this evening? What is ours to learn? And we just say, thank you, God. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so it is. Amen.
And so it is. Thanks so much, Diana. Okay. Now, Mendhi, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can introduce and begin.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be back again. So as you said, this is our fourth of this series on building spiritual community. And so far we've talked about mission, we've talked about values, we've talked about culture. We had a great opportunity last month to have some of the leaders from the AT&T Council. That was really fun and exciting. So this month we're going a little deeper. We're going into some of the specifics. And if you've missed any of the past ones, I encourage you to go back because they do kind of grow and build on each other. We're going to build on what we've talked about before in terms of mission and values and culture. We have talked in the past about how do you build a culture on purpose? And so I've shared some of the things that we do to create a specific culture. We also use small groups as a way of developing culture. So we'll go a little bit more into that. I've shared with you before that what we do in terms of small group culture is we have certain values that are tied to small groups. And those values become the 5 spiritual disciplines. And this will be a review for some, but it's great to go over again and again. So the first one is communion, which is for all of our groups, we have a prayer meditation practice, which is fairly standard in all of our communities. I'm sure you have a prayer meditation practice for everything that you do. So communion is our first. Connection is the second element that we build into all of our events. And connection is building friendships. It's building relationships, having fun together. Compassion is the third, where we are setting people up to care for each other. So ministry happens within our groups. Compassion is, and then community is the fourth one. So we do community service projects. We reach beyond our community. And then the fifth is challenge. So those are the 5 things that we do. Challenge is being intentional about our own spiritual development, our own spiritual growth. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is specifically that first spiritual discipline and how to use it in the context of developing leaders. So if you want to build spiritual community, one of the most important things we can learn to do is to learn how to develop leaders in our organizations. If we don't do that, what happens is we have communities that are about 30 to 50 people, which is about as much as one person can really take care of. If you want to grow beyond that, it's essential that we develop leaders. And that is something that we can learn to do better and better. And that's one of the purposes of this program is, how do you build community? Well, we learn to be better leaders and we empower and equip others to become better leaders as well. And that is how we grow. So let me back up a little bit. So as Stephen wonderfully said, I am the founder of a program called Spirit Groups. We use small groups as a tool to provide that infrastructure for training leaders. And I am passionate about groups because, to me, without groups, if all we have is Sunday and a bunch of special events or a bunch of fundraisers, we don't have opportunities so much to grow leadership. To me, there is no greater system for developing leaders than by creating a small group infrastructure. So we do small groups. The Spirit Group program is a year-long program. We always have groups going. We always have ways for people to plug in to those groups. And that means we're constantly developing leaders, people to lead those groups and to serve people in building friendships, in taking care of each other, and in doing community service together. So we use small groups as our leadership training program. And I think there's no better way to do it because it allows you to bring someone in. You can take someone. In fact, today, I believe you're going to meet someone who literally was a first-time guest in our ministry on Sunday. And we were recruiting for small groups. Our small group series launches this week. And I actually have tonight, my Spirit Group kicks off tonight. So it's really exciting to get to do that kickoff at the same time that I'm here with you, because you get to meet my group. And what we do in our groups is we have a year-long program. It's divvied up into different seasons. This season starts this week, and we start with a kickoff event. So for me, I am this series leading a group that is all about leadership. And it's a leaders group. We have all the members of our board, and it's open to anyone in the congregation who wants to be part of a leadership conversation. And we are going to be studying the book, The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, which is a fabulous book. Highly recommend this book because it talks about how do you create a healthy organization. So we're using our small group structure to provide opportunities for people to come together and share their ideas about not just how we can identify our own purpose and our own values, but how we can develop those values, that vision, that mission for the organization as a whole. So tonight, you're going to get to meet them as they start filtering in. And I don't know, about 15 minutes or so, you'll start meeting some of them. And as I mentioned, we have everything from board members who've been participating for a very long time to one young millennial who walked in our door. She actually saw the sign as she was taking a walk Sunday morning and popped in, and next thing you know, she signed up for a group, and now she's going to be here tonight in our leadership group. So I'm really excited to have a millennial perspective with us. So you'll get to meet the team and see how we use the structure to develop leadership. Within this structure, we have a very specific culture that all of our leaders are trained in. How do you develop a very specific culture using those 5 spiritual disciplines? So tonight, I thought we'd focus on the first of those spiritual disciplines, which is communion. Communion is our prayer practice. It's our meditation practice. And so I invite you, before we get too deep into this, I love to say hello to everybody. And I want to thank all of you who are here with us live and invite you in the chat room. I keep the chat open all the time. So before we get too deep into content, I'd love to just see who's here. So if you wouldn't mind, pop your name in there, let us know where you're from. And in our small groups, we always start with a check-in question. So let me throw this out to those of you who are here with us live and see how you'd like to check in. How would you answer this question? I was thinking about what would be a fun question for today, and what came to me is, what is the best leadership advice that you've ever gotten? And it may not be the best, but it may be something that really resonated with you, something that you've held on to. What's the best advice that anyone's ever given you? Or maybe just something that you hold on to. Maybe it's something you read or something that you just live by that helps you grow as a leader. So that's the check-in question. I invite you to share your name, where you're from, and a tidbit of leadership wisdom. And I'm going to go, and then Barbara, I'm going to invite you to do one too. So I will say, for me, I had several that popped into my head, but I remember specifically when I was first learning how to be a facilitator and a teacher and a trainer. I had this wonderful mentor, and I remember asking him, his name is Mark Reardon, and I asked him what advice he had for living a successful life. And he told me, specifically, I remember his words, he said, do the thing you love to eliminate the thing that you hate. And I thought about that for a while, and I continue thinking about it. I love to speak, I love to teach, I love building connections, and the thing that I would love to, if I could eliminate one thing from the world, for me, it would be loneliness, it would be isolation, disconnectedness. So when I use my gifts to eliminate that sense of isolation and loneliness, I feel most on purpose. So that was some really great leadership advice that I've received. Barbara, how about you? Do you have any nuggets, tips that words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Well, normally no, but in this particular case, yes, I do, because last week, one of our other live webinars that we do on a monthly basis is the Divine Feminine Peace Spa. And in that webinar, we reach out every month to international women leaders of note who set a model for us about how divine feminine leadership makes huge strides in terms of social change, and why the feminine leadership style differs slightly in the way that it approaches social change, and different dynamics in its methodology, different mindset about what is leadership, and how people are led into a new way of thinking. And so last week, our guest, we were so honored to have as our guest Dolores Huerta, who, along with Cesar Chavez, founded the United Farm Workers Association, and actually was the originator of the phrase "se puede," so yes, we can, and which she acknowledged that when she received the Presidential Medal of Honor from President Obama, that he admitted that he stole that from her. And it was her 88th birthday, or the eve of her 88th birthday. And we had a wonderful discussion. And that was actually one of the questions that I asked her outright is, what is your what is your notion, or what is the measure of leadership in your long career as a dynamic social change leader? And she said, the measuring the success of leadership, in my opinion, is by how many new leaders your leadership creates, or how many communities and community leaders are empowered because of what you bring to the table. Mm-hmm. So it's not about your leadership, it's about the legacy of leadership that you engender. And that really resonated with me. And I thought so much about our Seasons for Peace and Nonviolence, and how leadership there really meant empowering other individuals and leaders in other communities to step into leadership so that the equation multiplied itself. Yeah. And so that to me was like not so much a revelation, but a great inspiration to hear someone like Dolores Huerta talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And that's really what this is about, is not just growing in our own individual leadership skills, but a true leader is a leader of leaders. And so I'm seeing some really wonderful tips and advice popping up. Diana, thank you, Diana, for that lovely blessing. It's so good to see your name. Thank you for joining us on these salons. So the advice from Diana that she's sharing is to let go of perfectionism. That's a tough one for me. That's really good advice. And self-compassion is the lesson that she has. Diana's in the Unity Village area. So love and blessings to you, Diana. Maria is in Florida. And thank you, Maria, for sharing your comments and checking in. She says her best leadership advice she ever had was from a friend and mentor that told her to never ask someone to do something that she can't do, to be the example in the moral realm and professionally. I can tell it worked and it's still working. So grateful. So grateful. Yes, indeed. And thank you for sharing. And for those of you that are continuing to join us, our check-in question for today is to share your name, where you're from, and maybe a little bit of wisdom, leadership words of wisdom that has impacted you and influenced you perhaps in your own leadership style and your own leadership growth. So we've been talking about small groups and how we use small groups as a way to develop those leaders. Just like you were saying, Barbara, it's not enough for the minister to be a good leader. We have to be able to guide people in, and the mission we talked about before is so important to that, so that we are leading people somewhere specifically. You have to have a place to lead them to. Once we have that, what is the system that we have, the infrastructure that we have, where people can practice, where they can try things out, where they can make mistakes, and it's not a big deal. They're surrounded by love and compassion and people who are all in there learning and growing together. Small groups, in my opinion, are the best way to do that. We have a very specific culture we build around small groups, and the heart of that culture, the first of our spiritual disciplines is a practice of prayer and meditation. So this may seem like, 101 for our New Thought community. Of course, prayer and meditation is a part of everything that we do. So on the simplest level, that means that every time we have a group gathering, we begin with prayer. We begin with meditation, whatever the energy of the group is, whatever people want to do. Oftentimes we end in prayer, meditation, have prayer partners and things like that. So there is that sense of, we begin by elevating consciousness, and it starts within. That is fundamental to everything that we do. But I think it goes more than that as well. So when we talk about communion with oneness, with unity, we're also talking about helping people connect not just with higher consciousness, but connecting with their own specific purpose in the context of the mission of the organization. So if in that communion practice, I can reflect upon what are my skills, what are my gifts, what is my specific purpose, and then in the gathering itself, what is the purpose of this gathering? What is the purpose of this team? And how does that purpose connect with the mission of the organization? That a lot of those connections, those dots get connected through that prayer meditation practice, through that inner awareness that I have something to contribute to the greater all. So for instance, we help people individually. Part of our challenge, that's our fifth discipline challenge, is we go around and everyone decides, here's what I'm working on. Here's what I'm called to work on. This is the area that I'm called to expand in through this series. And then the groups themselves have a very specific purpose. So the purpose of our groups is to inspire infinite connections. So what that means is inspire connections with the infinite and inspire infinite connections amongst each other, inspire connections out in the greater community as well. So that is the purpose of our small groups. And we use that in the context of the mission of the organization. So our mission at Unity of the Foothills, where I am in Evergreen, Colorado, is to transform lives through the power of love. And our groups, the purpose of that is to create the connection that creates that transformation. So it's the communion practice is connecting with that and making sure that that mission stays alive and that purpose is on point and that people can identify their own place in the midst of that purpose. So I want to invite you, as you're listening, if you have ideas about how you use prayer meditation as a part of your developing of leaders, any practices that you have, please share them in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we can invite you onto the call to participate as well. So if you have ideas, please jump in and share them. So another thing that we've done, let me share this case study. This was from Unity Spiritual Center in Spokane. So many of you may be familiar with a book that Lynn McTaggart wrote. It came out last fall called The Power of Eight. And The Power of Eight is, it talks about the power of intention. You know, Lynn McTaggart wrote The Intention Experiment, The Field. And in The Power of Eight, she uses a practice where she brings together groups of about 8 people. 8 isn't magic, but it's a good solid number. And each person sets an intention, and then you hold the group in intention in a very specific way. And one of the things that she has discovered in her research, and I saw her speak at Mile High, it was a fabulous talk. She said, you know, we're very good in New Thought about, you know, here's my vision board and here's what I want and these are my desires, and we put it up there and we're very focused on, you know, setting the intentions and affirming. But sometimes we get so attached to those vision boards and so attached to the stuff that what she found in her practice was when we would let go of that vision. So create the vision, not get attached to the vision. Create the vision, but not get attached to the vision. And the way we do that is through taking our intention and sharing it with others. So she has this beautiful practice where you could take one person's desire, one person, maybe it's a healing experience they want, or a challenge they're overcoming, and the whole group does this power up practice where they focus their intention on one person. And it can be a person in the group or a person beyond the group. The wonderful thing that she's found happens is when we hold our intention on someone else's desires, on an outcome, a positive outcome for someone else, it gets us out of the way. And then all the things that are on that vision board end up coming to fruition. The things where perhaps we've been stuck suddenly start taking care of themselves. So we had a small group, one of our campuses, one of our Spirit Group campuses in Spokane, Washington, did an entire series, took the entire church through the Power of Eight using their small groups. And they spent, our Spirit Group series run about 10 weeks. So we've got about 6 weeks of content. And then we do some other fun things together as part of that series. And those groups got together week after week after week, focusing on someone else's intention each week and hearing the amazing sense of connection that came out of that, hearing how people's lives were changing, the power of group focus, miracles were happening in that church. So that's all part of that communion practice that is part of developing leaders. In fact, from that ministry, there was a story of a woman who had been involved in New Thought communities for over 25 years. And she got into a small group, and what the group discovered when she was setting her intentions on how she wanted to grow, what they discovered was after 25 years of being in the New Thought community, she had never, ever prayed in front of other people. She had never done a public prayer. And there in her spirit group, for the first time, they said, okay, let's give it a go. For the first time, she prayed out loud. She prayed with a group of people doing an opening prayer. And that was a life-changing experience. That was stepping into leadership in a way that she had never had the confidence to do before. And the small group infrastructure is what makes that possible. So as you're listening, I'm going to invite you to ask your questions in the chat room. If you have your own stories or examples of groups that you've used or been a part of, and how you've seen leaders grow and develop through those groups. Would love to hear from you and get some great examples of that. So yes, Miss Barbara, what do you have?
Well, your guest should be pouring in soon, hopefully, right? But Lynn is actually a friend of mine and of AG&T for a while, and we had a Zoom call last week. She's living in London. We had something business to discuss about this group we both belong to called Evolutionary Leaders. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the power of 8 and her intention experiments again. And we ended up talking about it a little in the context of what we know now about quantum science and Buckminster Fuller's notion that there are only 2 directions, which is receiving and transmitting. Mm. And so we talked about the actual scientific basis of when you change direction, instead of receiving energy and pouring energy into yourself and your own intention. I'm not saying it necessarily even has to be ego-based. It's just very, very focused toward your own outcome. Then you're actually blocking your process a little bit, because you're not allowing the system to open and breathe into its next phase, which it has to go out so that something new can come in. And then you go out, something new comes in. So there's actually a physical dynamic present that supports this technology. It was very interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's a wonderful book and fascinating research. You know, Lynn is a researcher. That's where her background is. And for her to write this book where she's, of all the research and all the science, there are things that she's observing that the research and the science, you know, we can only scratch the surface and guess, you know, that, yeah, there's probably something going on, because we see the cause and the effect. We see the cause and the effect over and over again. And as you are developing leaders, what can happen sometimes, if all we have is our Sunday service and all we have is the minister up there doing the opening prayer or the prayer chaplains doing the prayer, sometimes people think you have to be that person. You have to, you know, have the training. And so being able to be in a small group where you pray together, you meditate together, you can get out of your own way and focus on the needs of others is a really powerful way to begin cultivating leadership. And one of the things that we focus on specifically in our Spirit Groups program is identifying what are the baby steps. You know, what is the first step on the journey? So instead of throwing somebody up on the pulpit and saying, hey, do a prayer in front of, you know, the whole congregation, it's much simpler to say, you know, would you like to try the opening prayer for our group of 5 or a group of 8? Would you like to try doing the closing meditation? I have in my own groups found, you know, that I've discovered amazing gifts in people through this process of just providing an environment where there's not an expert in the room. So it's just us, and we're here for each other, and it's a beautiful, beautiful space for community meditation and prayer. So that being said, I hear voices out there, and even though I have sticky notes, I'm very big on sticky notes. I've got sticky notes everywhere. I have sticky notes all over my door saying, come in when you get here. I can tell that they're not because they are out there jabbing with each other and connecting. That's the next thing that we'll be talking about in our next series is how do you cultivate connection? How do you foster friendships where people don't just come in passively to your community and then leave passively and never have a real interaction. So how do you foster that? And I see people out my window.
So why don't you go bring your people in? Yeah,
so let me wave them in. And so Barbara, I'm going to allow you to talk amongst yourselves. And if you're in the chat room, if you have questions, this is a great time to post those as well. So share your thoughts, Barbara. I'm going to wave them in.
Okay, we'll just wait. And I'll just mention something that had been on my mind that many of you know. Dr. Michael Beckwith, who's is actually the president of Association for Global New Thought. And I've always been very impressed with the way that he builds leadership at Agape, which is very similar to what Mendhi's been talking about, that he encourages and draws his congregants out because he recognizes a gift or a talent in them. And then little by little, even though they're shy, draws them out to do prayers here and there to get up on the podium and make an announcement. In other words, he says, creating little clones of himself all over Agape. And it creates such an excellent spirit of communication and community and shared leadership, which I believe is the model of leadership for the future, because it certainly can't continue as a hierarchy as we've gotten used to in the past. So look, Mendhi's got company.
I do have company, and I know there's more out there that are making their way in. So we can, as you hear people come in, we'll wave them in the room. But I want to, I'll let them introduce themselves. But these are members of our community at Unity of the Foothills, and as I mentioned, we have small groups. This specific group that's kicking off tonight has a leadership focus. So everybody that's here is here either to contribute to the vision for our spiritual community. Some of them are entrepreneurs, so they're also using this concept for their own business, for their own organization. But we've been talking about small groups, and we've been talking about how to cultivate leadership through small groups. So I'm going to turn it over to them, because I know both of these wonderful spiritual beings have participated in groups before. And what I'd love to hear you share is anything that you've noticed about how leaders are being developed through the small groups. Like, how have you seen people grow and change and step into leadership in ways that perhaps they haven't before, or anything else that you'd like to share about your small group experience? So I'm going to turn over to Hillary first. You can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Hillary Burns, and this will be the third spirit group that I've been in, the one that Mendhi's going to be leading with us tonight. It's been delightful to watch the people who, first of all, were members of a spirit group, and then that was last fall. We had our first kickoff of spirit groups, and then our winter spirit groups, a woman who had been a part of my group decided she wanted to be the leader of a group, and it turned out just kind of serendipitously, it was all women, and we were meeting on Saturday morning, and she did such an excellent job of reining in the women who wanted to go on talking and talking, because we all know women are comfortable talking, especially if they get to know each other, and that's one of the beautiful things that happens in the spirit groups or any small group. You get to really feel safe with people, and you share things that are really deep and meaningful. And we complimented Jan at least 10 times during the 6 weeks of our content, because she did it gently and yet firmly. She had the right balance of letting people feel respected, and yet you let them know it's time to give somebody else a chance to have the floor. And there have been other people who have been part of a group who've also stepped up and have been leading groups. And I think it's a wonderful way for people to learn to be a leader, because you get to see an example of somebody who's maybe a new leader in the church. And we get so much support from Mendhi and her whole spirit groups program that we don't feel we're the Lone Ranger. We don't feel we're having to recreate the wheel. She has so much wonderful material for us to use. And there's also the freedom to choose something completely different. One of our groups that's going to be meeting next week for the first time is studying a book called The Course of Love by Maria Perome. And several of us have gotten into that before we even knew she was going to be leading this book study on it. And we know it's going to take more than one spirit group session of 6 weeks to get through it, but we're open to how we're going to make that work. So this whole thing, it just feels like a wonderful work in progress. People feel they can either choose some of the content on the spirit group's website, or now we can choose things that are completely different, that are touching a lot of people in other ways. Sadie, how about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna scoot over so you can get in.
Hi, I'm Sadie. So this is only my second spirit group, and I've done more of a leadership role in the community as into other fundraisers, but I've never really done any leadership roles in the spiritual community. So I thought, what the heck? I read the leadership part, and I thought, well, maybe there is more out there that I should be doing on the spiritual community, and I enjoy taking the lead on things. So I'm in.
She's
In
in.
for the ride. So
Yeah.
glad to be here.
Yeah. And we are kicking off our leadership group this evening, which is very, very exciting. Hillary over here is, she didn't mention this, but she is now our program leader coordinator for all of our groups. So she has an amazing gift for connection and communion. We've been focusing on communion a lot tonight in terms of having that very prayerful, grounded presence, that she can then empower others to step into that as well. So it's been really exciting to see her step into leading the entire program, first as a leader and then as a participant, and now as our coordinator for the entire program. So that's been really exciting as well. And, you know, Hillary, you reminded me as well, one of the things that we did through our Spirit Groups program was we trained our chaplains for the year. So we just completed a 10-week series with our chaplain team where they went through their entire career chaplain training in the context of being a spirit group, being more than a class where you just learn things together, but really being a support system for each other, a spiritual family, that there is a sense of, you know, a lot of us are leaders in our life, and being a leader at church might feel a little different, or being a leader in a spiritual sense. You know, you say, you know, are you a spiritual leader? Like, I don't know if I would call myself a spiritual leader. You know, sometimes it's a little hard to step into that sense of identity. But the truth is, if we start acting as in leadership roles and acting from a place of spirit and connection and oneness, we are spiritual leaders, whether we acknowledge it or not. And we don't have to have a label for it to be able to step into it. So that's what we're doing here in Colorado, and having a really tremendous impact. Would either of you like to share just what you've observed in terms of our culture as a whole? Any changes that you've noticed over the past few months?
What I'm sensing is our congregation feels much more connected on Sunday mornings. And for the first time since I've been a member of this particular congregation, which is 21 years, we are getting involved in service projects for our community. That never happened before, and I was thirsting for it, and I didn't know other people were as well. And it's one of the ingredients of our Spirit Groups program, and I can just see people feeling connected not just to each other, but now to our greater community. And that was the next thing that had to happen for us to have it be a full experience for everybody. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I would just say it's pretty typical to meet on Sundays, and then you don't see anybody again until the following Sunday. And I just found it very nice to have connection during the week, and you know, feel like you can reach out and say, well, what if our group did this, or just find other things to do, and not have to just limit it to one day a week.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's where we're, you know, as we grow in looking at the culture that we create through our groups, again, it's again that sense of connection, that sense of making friendships, not just seeing each other on Sunday and recognizing a face, but actually knowing what's happening in people's lives and being there for each other. It is amazing to me. You know, you see each other on Sunday and everyone's happy, and you give your hugs and drink your coffee and off you go. But when you sit down in a small group, what you realize is that people are going through some challenging times, and we would never know. We would never know just based on our Sunday experience. But when we sit down together, when we go into our heart space, when we share our intentions and our goals and our challenges, we see each other in a new way. And it does influence how we show up on Sunday morning. Yes, Miss Barbara.
You know, I wanted to take kind of a step back and reflect on where I sit from the standpoint of Association for Global New Thought, where our enterprise these days is inviting all of the New Thought organizations that have always kind of operated independently and autonomously, always amicably, but sort of with their own identity in mind under the banner of New Thought. And what AGNT has been focused on lately is what would it look like if we had, you know, full freedom of expression to retain our autonomous, independent identities as Unity, as Science of Mind, as Religious Science, as Centers for Spiritual Living, as Universal Foundation for Better Living, as Agape, etc., when it was appropriate to function autonomously. But then now we're facing a world in which there are some occasions on which we're going out into the world and we want to be stronger as a movement, because a lot of people don't understand the difference between one or another Unity organization or religious science. But in order to present as New Thought and this richness of teaching that we have to offer in the world, especially since we're now focusing on engaged spirituality, as you said, going out into the community and providing service. And I'm thinking about when I speak, when people ask me about the community or the movement of New Thought, I talk about all of the wonderful communities that already exist all over the country and in other countries as well, who have been spending decades reading the books and going to the workshops and meditating and praying together and studying the material and developing their inner selves and developing the resources that most people don't even think about in the course of their lives. And my hunger is that with this kind of community already in place all over the nation and already so mature and so well educated and so enlightened in many ways, what would it be like if we now stepped into our next level of leadership and instead of asking, oh, what can we do? What book can we read? What community project can we be involved in? There's so much to do out there. If we were to take this community of leaders as a network nationwide and really start pouring in the content that all of you, and especially I might add the women, are capable of achieving, we really need to put our people to work in the world because they're our best resources and we're ready to pop. That's my feeling. And so what you're creating there is a perfect model and methodology for that. But if we could bump it up to the next level, we could be a real significant force for change in the entire nation. I can just feel that it's coming now.
For everything that you're hearing here at Unity of the Foothills is happening in campuses around the country, actually all the way into Canada. So we have Unity churches, CSL churches, all across the country, from Florida to Washington to Edmonton, Canada. And they're going through the same process with all of the leaders, the people that are serving as Hillary is. So serving and developing these groups within the campuses, we come together and do leadership huddles and masterminds. Hey, come in, welcome. So our group is growing, and you get to meet. I'm going to introduce you to someone very special in just a moment. So we are creating those connections, and I want to invite everyone that's watching, if you are interested in learning more and seeing how this movement is coming together. June 8th through 10th, we are going to be at Unity Village doing our 3rd annual Small Group Leadership Summit. I'll be there, Hillary will be there, and you're all invited. So you're invited to come and to check out, for those who are doing small groups, it's our chance to share ideas and best practices. And for those who are new to small groups, it's a chance to meet people who are doing it to see the difference that it's making. So I just had my fabulous guest walk in the room. You can't see, I'm going to move my computer so you can see her. So I had shared with you, this is our leadership group, and how exciting it is that on Sunday morning we had a newcomer walk in, literally saw the sign, we walking the dog or just taking a walk?
I was just taking a walk.
Just taking a walk, saw the sign, popped in, and next thing you know, she's signing up for a group, and now, not just any group, she's in our leadership group, and we're so excited to have her. So I'm going to turn it over to Rose. There's Rose.
Hi, everybody.
So,
nice to meet you.
Yeah, so Rose, I'm going to, I want to share, you bring a millennial perspective. And one of the big questions that I get from our ministries is our movement wants to reach younger generations. We want to engage people just like you. And so the question is, what is it that had you say yes? What is it that had, say yes to this group, to answering the call to just walk in the door? What is it that's resonating with you about spiritual community? And what do you think others that are, in your age range, what are you looking for, and what are you finding?
So I think that we have a very complex, very unique generation. I think that being a young person in today's age is much different than it was just a decade or two ago with social media, and there's a lot of pressures that are new to our generation that weren't here before. And I know from talking to other people that are more spiritually inclined that having a foundation to deal with what comes up in life is very grounding. And I think that with everything we're exposed to as young people, we don't really have a lot of grounding in our culture. which is kind of like the MTV, Instagram, Facebook, what you look like, Snapchat, Tinder type of generation, is missing that. And I think we're kind of at a 50-50 perspective where we're seeing a lot of young people rising up to take political stands on things that are going on in the world. And we're also seeing a lot of people voicing their opinions, the Me Too movement, and branching out for change in the environment. But there's also, I think, a really deep need for spirituality that's missing, because we have bullying and we have pressure to get into the best colleges, and we have just a life that we have to lead, that's very intimidating, with paying rent and trying to figure out who we are as individuals and as spiritual beings, and not just as profiles on Facebook. So what I appreciate about going into spiritual practice is that you get a chance to dive deeper, which is not something you get to do as a young person, at least in my experience. And it's starting to grow, and I'm excited about that, and I'd like to be a part of that. Honestly, though, for me, it was just a synchronicity. I think that spirit works in really beautiful ways, and I was, like she said, was contemplating things in my life as I was walking, and just enjoying the sunshine and taking in the beautiful day up here in the mountains. And Unity's sign was there, and there's this logo underneath it that said something about, like, I can't exactly remember the words, but it had something to do with, like, bringing people together through love, and that just spoke to me. So that's why I'm here.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think all of us that are part of this are like, yes, that there is this generation that is in many ways very different. And I think what I'm very clear on is the relevance is there, the need and the drive and the yearning is there, and it's just a matter of providing the structure for, how do we get young people connected into spiritual community where you can go deep and you can find that sense of community. And I think we are small. I love small groups as a way to do that, because it's really easy to find a couple people that you resonate with, and then from there you can just grow. You don't need to have a huge group in order to find that sense of connection that you're looking for. Barbara, what would you like to share?
Well, I wanted to ask your friend, I can't remember her name.
Rose.
I wanted to ask Rose a question. We understand it's a two-way street, and that my question is, what is it that you think that your generation would actually need from our situation? We have our way of doing things, and we have an organization, and in some ways we're better because we've had more years to organize and develop resources and create, that sort of thing. But we should also be responsive, and you should feel open enough to actually say, well, if this community could provide more of this, or if it did something a little differently in one way or another, or if we could only do such and such, that would appeal more, so that we wouldn't just be trying to fit into your space, but we would really feel as if you were altering or modifying your space in order to better suit our own comfort zone. What would some of those things be?
That's a really good question. I think if I'm understanding you correctly, you're asking me what millennials or people my age would be more drawn to be involved in unity or spiritual practice. Is that correct?
That's exactly what I'm asking you, is what would draw you and appeal to you even more?
I think technology is a big one, because the phones are always with us. And so having a marketing campaign that uses things like Pinterest or Facebook, I think would draw in people more of my age. I would say doing things that are a little more hip, like I hate to make you guys sound like you're not hip, but
we're not always
we
hip.
have like a Nat the attention span of a gnat. So like something that really grabs our attention, where it's like like I saw this thing at the Mercury Cafe and I was like, cool, they've got fun lights and a neat stage and good food. And I'm like, yeah, I'm down, I'll come. So just picking the right environment. And then I think, as much as we're drawn to this and as much as we're curious and as much as we need it, it's still a stigma, I think, for young people to explore their spirituality. It's not something that's really been socially acceptable. It's starting to change. So I think getting a face that is already socially acceptable, who is also spiritual. Like I recently watched a documentary about highly sensitive people, and they had Alana Morissette in the documentary, and she happens to be a highly sensitive person who uses spirituality to handle her sensitivities. So like picking somebody that is spiritual but also kind of in the flow, kind of cool, that is something that would be of interest, I think, to young people.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very enlightening.
I'm glad that I know who that is because it makes me feel cool. I know Alanis Morissette. I love her. So yeah, and I also, just to point out, because we have talked in this series about the power of mission. So notice Rose has been to our community once, saw the sign, and you notice what she resonated with was our mission statement, and it is transforming lives through the power of love. So while the exact words were a little nebulous, the sense of it stuck, because the mission statement is clear and concise, and it's on our signs, and it's reiterated in our service. So that's the power of what are you about, and being able to communicate that powerfully. And I know we're getting short on time. I'd love to ask Rose one more question. Do I have time for one more quick Rose question? So I thank you for being on our impromptu panel. You are a celebrity. You are a celebrity because you're the future. You're the future of our movement. And so when we find young people who are drawn to the message, what I want to know is, what excites you? If we were to empower you as a leader, what's the space that you want? What would you do if you were given the reins? What are you being called into?
It's kind of a big question.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a vision question. Personally, I've always wanted to do speaking and leading groups and getting out into the world. I think that specifically, it would be really cool to take the principles and apply them in a way that could be used in daily life for people that are young. So it's like very specific, concrete examples, because I think that spirituality is really daunting, and you have a lot of different paths in spirituality, a lot of different leaders. I keep using spirit because I'm fairly new to unity, but that's the word that comes to me. Spirit being like the path of understanding that thoughts manifest and that there's life in everything and that you're a part of that life. That's what I mean by spirit and spirituality. So kind of dissecting the principles and making them specifically valid to particular instances in life, like the dating world, and like knowing that you are a spiritual being and you are created divinely, makes you pick your partner a lot better than most girls would. So I think raising young women with this idea that, hey, you're a part of the freaking cosmos, you really should not settle for, someone who insists that you do things you don't want to do and such, is an example of bringing a spiritual principle to an issue that matters to us, that we deal with every day. Beautiful. So that's what I would do.
I love it. Yeah, there is a book that I've read called Expensive Sentences, and the expensive what it is, it's about identifying the things that we say that are costing us. The things that we sort of hold out as nuggets of truth that aren't actually truth, and they cause us to lose opportunities. One of the ones that I hear in New Thought a lot is that, in order to get to the sense of enlightenment that we have, you have to have life experience. It's like, we've been through all the classes and we've done all the stuff and we've paid our dues, and that's why we've gotten where we are. That's why we resonate with unity teachings. And I will say, from knowing the millennials that I know and younger, the children that I know, they're coming in with this knowledge, this wisdom that some of us have had to work very hard to get through our stuff. They're coming in with it already. And if we can be receptive to that and humble to that, that they're coming in with a connection that is beyond what some of us have attained after a lifetime of trying. They're coming in with this receptivity and to be able to hand the reins over and provide opportunities for them to lead and to grow and to do many of these things that are relevant to different phases in our life. So Barbara?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm awfully chatty tonight more than usual, but since we're on the subject, it occurred to me that when I was growing up and we were in a settings, first of all, we didn't often get in multi-generational settings that didn't already keep us in our place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that we were just there, but not to be necessarily heard or involved in the conversation. But I remember not only did I not have adults around me who were interested in what I had to say, they were actively interested in not hearing what I had to say or making it somehow wrong or inappropriate or not fitting in. And so I wanted to say that, number one, I think that maybe the wisdom of our generation is that we're more than happy to actively seek the voice of the younger generation because we know what it's worth. And secondly, it might not be so much that the young people are now somehow magically coming in with a greater understanding of themselves and the universe, although that could be true because of, say, like the morphogenetic field and the metaphysical technology that one could apply to that. But what's probably true is that the people that we as the elder generation who are watching and paying attention to the young people coming in are recognizing in them the innate enlightened capabilities that all living beings come in with, mm-hmm. and that we came in with, but that were suppressed and squashed and not recognized or made wrong until we didn't exhibit them anymore and they went underground. And then we had to find our own spiritual path, and it did cost us a lot. So I think that that's a very hopeful thing to know about in our generation that we can build on. And so I just wanted to get that out there.
Absolutely. And I know we're coming up on time. I did want to share that I have started today, as Stephen said in the introduction, I used to have a radio show called The Leading Edge. And today I relaunched that this time as a podcast. So if anyone is interested we're going to be doing a weekly podcast studying what our leadership team is studying, the book, The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. And we'll be sharing insights from that and having discussion on my Facebook page, which is at facebook.com/Mendhi Audlin. So if anyone's interested in that, I want to invite you to be a part of The Leading Edge and to share some leadership tips with each other and, of course, with your communities as well.
Okay, well, thanks, everyone. This turned into a lively discussion that went very quickly tonight. Thanks for everyone to be here. We'll send out information about the recording tomorrow. And Mendhi will be here with us again next month. You'll get an automatic notification about when that is because I can't remember the exact date. Can you?
Next month, sometime.
Sometime in May, we'll be joining community again. So I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Mendhi, especially for showing up and giving us such great content and all of your great people. I'm so happy to meet you guys. Keep up the good work.
Yes.
And thanks again. Good night, everyone. Thank you
so much, Barbara. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. We'll see you next month. Bye. Bye.